Hello, welcome to day 2, Industrial Nationalism. We're moving on to day 2, which is the second Industrial Revolution. Question number 1, how did mass production make better weapons and better technology? So mass production is simply producing things in mass, producing things in large numbers. And mass production is not just producing large numbers of things, but large numbers of identical things, things that are exactly the same, usually made by machine, so that they are all exactly the same. Once you have standardized items, you can be more precise. If you have a machine to make bullets, for example, you can make those bullets all exactly the same. If you can mass produce bullets, you can have the exact same size and shape of bullets for, say, an entire army. Having the same size and shape of bullets, or in the case of what's on our screen here, the same size, shape, style, etc., of a rifle, this enabled the military to have items of far better quality, far lower prices, and with standardization, it made it easier to train soldiers, made it easier for soldiers to use the weapons, made it easier for the soldiers to use each other's weapons. So you imagine battle scenarios where having the difference between 5 to 10 bullets for a battle versus 500 bullets for a battle, you're going to use a different strategy. Or with standardized rifles, for example, standard issue rifles like the Enfield rifle of 1853. If the soldier next to you fell down in battle, you could take their weapon and use it, and it would be exactly functionally the same as your own. If all the guns are the same and all the bullets are the same, you can have a more precise fit between the bullets and the barrel of the gun. The typical shotgun barrel, as you can see in this picture here, is a smooth bore. The typical rifle barrel has a spiral-shaped rifling in it. In order for the rifling to increase the accuracy of the shot, the bullets need to fit tightly within the barrel so that they come out in a smooth spiral shape. Also, by mass producing these guns, you were able to have all of the parts be identical. So at the bottom there, you have the parts for the Enfield rifle disassembled, and then you can assemble them or replace any of the parts as they break. The most complicated part, the firing mechanism, you can see there in the larger picture in the middle of the screen, can be taken off and replaced. It can be taken off and pieces of it can be replaced, and you don't have to replace the entire weapon. Additionally, you can move on to even better technology, even more complex things, like the Gatling gun on the right-hand side here in 1861, invented by a guy named Gatling, so it was named after him. And all that he did was basically string together several barrels of existing sort of gun technology in a circular shape. And then as the barrels go around, the bullets drop into the top, as you can see in the diagram on the bottom right, and the bullets are fired in a series. It's the first semi-automatic weapon. It's operated with a crank, which rotates the barrels around. This technology only works with the standardization and mass production of bullets and barrels, for example, that are all exactly identical. If the bullets drop into those different little slots and are fired out of the different barrels, there's no way to know which bullet is going to end up in which barrel. And so you can't have customized bullets and barrels and everything like they used to have, because it just simply won't work. This way, the guns are less likely to jam, they're less likely to overheat, they're less likely to explode, and they're easier to repair, they're easier to exchange, they're easier for any soldier to operate any weapon. Slide number 2. How did manufactured interchangeable parts make it easier to control colonies like India? So continuing along with the story of our Enfield rifle at the top left, interchangeable parts made it possible to repair guns and weapons like the Enfield rifle at a distance. No longer did you need to get an entire shipment of guns all the way from England all the way to India. You could instead ship crates and boxes full of replacement parts. And then if one portion of the gun broke, you could just replace that part on the ground in India or at the military fortress in India without having to either send for a skilled craftsman to make a new part or send all the way back to England for new weapons. Those interchangeable parts made it easier for the military in India to maintain their weapons, to use those weapons to maintain control, and in the case of another technology, interchangeable parts made it possible to control the colony geographically. Yes, we're talking about trains. Uh, Steam-powered locomotive trains were built all across India by the British, used to control the land and thus the people. They were used to transport supplies, they were used to transport money, they were used to transport soldiers and weapons for those soldiers. Much like with the guns, transporting a train, fully functional, a steam engine locomotive from London all the way to India, was going to be relatively difficult. However, you disassemble it, put it on a boat, bring it to India, and then reassemble it. That's possible, but pretty laborious. The thing that really makes railroads possible in the colonies is interchangeable parts. Those interchangeable parts mean, just like with the rifles, just like with the guns, you can have interchangeable replaceable parts for steam locomotives as well. So if you have one axle of one part of one piece of the machinery that breaks, you can replace just that part. If you have one gasket, one drive shaft, one wheel, one anything, you can replace that one part. All the way down to rivets and nuts and bolts and screws, you can replace each of those parts without having to call in a skilled craftsperson to build you an entirely new train. The map in the middle of the screen shows you all of the extent of the railroads in India in the late 1800s that the British built. By putting train tracks and railroads all across India, it enabled the British to move their soldiers and their government officials and their law enforcement people around the colony, and that made it easier for them to control India. Without interchangeable parts, you have no railroads. Without no railroads, it is much more difficult to control a large area like India, and it is much more difficult to make money off of a colony like India. Number 3, and our last slide for today. Why did European nations copy the American system and the British miracle of industrial productivity? The British had invented interchangeable parts, mass production, and all of that technology that we spent the last 2 slides talking about. The Americans were doing the same process at the same time, sort of in parallel, but the American system took those things and combined them in an innovative way. The assembly line. Instead of having the products sit still and the workers move from station to station, you have the products move and the workers stay still. So this assembly line, as you can see on the left side of the screen, it's kind of like one of those conveyor belts at the airport that, the suitcases go on and go around the little belt. Except for you imagine that the parts are the things that you're working on, sit on there, and then they go around the corner and someone else does something on it, and then it gets moved down the conveyor belt, and then someone else does something on it. What this does is it speeds up the production just a little bit more. So not only do you have interchangeable parts and you have mass production, but now you can have specialized workers who do just one part of the process, and they don't even have to walk around or move from place to place to do it. This new system and all of these things combined to what historians call the British miracle. And that is being signified by this picture on the lower right. Cities across Britain miraculously exploded in industrialized development. Cities like Sheffield and Birmingham, Manchester and Leeds, and London exploded in size and exploded in productivity. Factories were built up not only to build guns or steam engines or railroads, but now they were built to build all kinds of other objects that people wanted or that made people's life better. Things like silverware, things like toys, things like watches and clocks and dishes and cups and shoes and shirts and blankets. Everything that you can think of in your life that would make your life easier can get manufactured and mass produced. These factories created the British miracle of industrial productivity because they increased the amount of things they could produce. When you increase the number of things you produce, you can bring down the price of those things. The more things you can sell, the more money you can make. And since they were producing things that everybody pretty much wanted, because they increased your quality of life, they were able to sell almost everything that was produced. New wheels, new lamps, new doorknobs, new shoes, new clothing, new pottery. All of these things make people's lives better. For example, would you rather have one shirt or 5 shirts? Would you rather have one pair of shoes or 2 pairs of shoes? Would you rather have one spoon or a whole set of silverware? And so, as the price of these goods came down because the production increased, supply increased, and therefore the equilibrium price came down, demand increased, but then productivity increased, and so on and so forth. And the Industrial Revolution started to spread. This is what's known as the Second Industrial Revolution, where the rest of Europe started copying the British miracle. And you can see in this map on the top right that in the 1840s, industrialization was pretty much limited to Britain. But by the 1850s, it had moved to the mainland and was being copied by countries such as Belgium. By the 1860s, it's being copied by countries like the German-speaking states, and then by the 1870s, it's increasing even further. That completes our summaries for today's lesson. And tonight's reading, your focus question to tie it all together is, why did Germany and Belgium believe the Second Industrial Revolution would make the British military more powerful?